What if I told you that the deepest, most secret fishing hole you have been guarding for years is actually a biological graveyard where absolutely nothing can survive? Yes, you heard me right. I want to ask you a serious question. Are you fishing below the thermocline, where there is literally not enough oxygen for a fish to stay alive? Today we are going to talk about a massive mistake that 99% of weekend anglers make every single summer. We are going to break down an invisible barrier hidden right under your boat that is completely ruining your catch rate. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will have a sudden realization about why you have been getting skunked on those hot August afternoons. We are going to expose the real reason why your lures are untouched and why the fish seem to have completely vanished. But before we get into the details, I want to hear from you. Do you honestly believe that the biggest fish always go to the deepest part of the lake when it gets hot? Drop a comment right now and let me know, because we are about to tear that old-school theory wide open. Let us set the stage here. This topic is incredibly important because it is the difference between a live well full of fish and a completely miserable day on the water. For generations, we have been told the exact same thing by our fathers and our grandfathers. The rule was simple. When the sun is beating down and the water surface feels like a warm bathtub, the fish get uncomfortable. So, to find the big ones, you have to go deep. You have to find that cool, dark water at the very bottom of the lake. It makes perfect logical sense to a human being. We want to sit in the air conditioning when it is hot outside. So we assume a fish wants to sit in the deepest, coldest hole it can find. Because of this deeply ingrained habit, millions of fishermen do the exact same routine year after year. They buy heavy sinkers, they buy deep diving crankbaits, and they spend hours dragging their gear through 30 or 40 feet of water. They stare at their rod tips, wondering why they are not getting a single bite, completely unaware that they are dropping their hooks into a toxic environment. It is time to unlearn the bad habits we have been repeating for decades. Picture this scenario. You are out on the lake, and the sun is just starting to peek over the trees. The water is completely still, looking just like a sheet of glass. You have got your favorite rod in your hands, the one that has caught you dozens of good fish over the years. You tie on your absolute best lure, maybe a heavy jig or a big soft plastic, and you cast it out as far as you can. You let it sink all the way down to the bottom. After all, it is the middle of July, it is 90 degrees outside, and you have always been told that the big fish go deep to find cold water. So you are bouncing that jig in 30 feet of water, feeling every single rock and piece of sunken timber. You wait patiently, you twitch the rod, you wait some more. An entire hour goes by, then 2 hours. The sun is getting higher, you are starting to sweat, and your cooler is completely empty. You start blaming the weather, you blame the bait. You might even blame the lake itself. You tell yourself that the fish have just shut down for the day. But the truth is far more shocking. You are fishing in a literal dead zone. To understand why you are not catching anything in that deep water, we need to talk about an invisible barrier called the thermocline. Imagine the lake is a giant layer cake. During the early spring, the water is pretty much the same temperature from the top all the way to the bottom. The wind blows, the water mixes, and oxygen is everywhere. A fish can swim right at the surface or dig around in the deepest trenches, and they will be completely fine. But as the summer drags on and the sun beats down day after day, that water starts to separate. It stops mixing. The lake divides itself into 3 very distinct layers. It is a biological process that happens in almost every deep body of water across the country. And if you do not know how to read these layers, you are completely blind out there. You are guessing. And guessing is the fastest way to waste your precious weekend. The thermocline is that middle layer, the transition zone where the water temperature drops incredibly fast. It is the most important dividing line in the entire lake, and ignoring it is the biggest mistake you can make. Let us break down those layers in simple terms. The top layer is called the epilimnion, but you can just call it the surface layer. This water is warm. It is comfortable for swimming, and most importantly, it is constantly mixed by the wind. Because the wind chops up the surface, this top layer is absolutely packed with oxygen. It is like a breath of fresh air for the fish. Now, jump down to the very bottom layer, known as the hyperlimnion. This water is incredibly cold. It is completely isolated from the wind and the surface. Because it never mixes with the air above, no new oxygen can get down there. It is sealed off, wedged right between that warm, oxygen-rich top layer and that freezing cold, isolated bottom layer is the thermocline. The thermocline is a thin band of water where the temperature suddenly plummets. We are talking about a drop of maybe 10 degrees in just a few feet of water. It is a harsh, sudden change. For a fish, swimming through the thermocline feels like walking out of a heated house straight into a freezing winter blizzard. Here is the harsh reality about that bottom layer of water. As the summer progresses, the bottom of the lake becomes a biological wasteland. Think about everything that falls to the bottom of a lake: dead algae, rotting weeds, sunken leaves, and dead fish. All of that organic matter starts to decay, and the process of decaying consumes massive amounts of oxygen. Because that bottom layer is sealed off from the surface by the thermocline, the oxygen cannot be replaced. The rotting muck literally sucks every last drop of life, giving oxygen out of the deep water. By the time midsummer rolls around, that deep water has zero oxygen left, none. It is scientifically impossible for a bass, a walleye, or a crappie to survive down there. If a fish swims down into that bottom layer, it will literally suffocate in a matter of minutes. It is a toxic environment filled with dangerous gases. Yet this is exactly where thousands of fishermen are dragging their heavy sinkers and deep-diving baits, wondering why they cannot get a bite. This brings us to the ultimate fishing myth, the advice your grandpa gave you. The golden rule of summer fishing is to go deep for big fish. Grandpa was right about a lot of things, but in the middle of August, this advice is completely backward. It is time to throw that old school thinking right out the window. Yes, fish want cooler water. They do not want to roast in the 80-degree surface water, but they also need to breathe. Oxygen is always more important than temperature. A fish will choose to be slightly warm and alive over being perfectly cool and suffocating. So, they get pushed into a very specific zone. They cannot go to the bottom because they will choke. They do not want to be at the very top because it is too hot and bright. So where do they go? They hover right in or slightly above the thermocline. They find the exact depth where the water is just cool enough but still has enough oxygen from the top layer. They are suspended in the middle of the water column, completely ignoring your bait that is dragging through the mud 20 feet below them. Let me paint a picture for you. You are sitting in your boat on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. You have got a couple of buddies with you, and you are all drinking cold sodas, having a great time. You look at your expensive fish finder, and you see the bottom is 40 feet down. You tell your buddies to drop their heavy jigs all the way to the dirt. You are sitting there feeling the bottom, waiting for that familiar thump on the end of your line, but nothing happens. What you do not realize is that the thermocline is set up at 20 feet. That means from 20 feet down to 40 feet, there is absolutely no oxygen. You are sitting there, happily dragging $40 worth of lures through a toxic, suffocating graveyard. Meanwhile, an entire school of massive fish is suspended at 18 feet, just a few feet above the dead zone, completely safe and actively feeding. They are swimming right over your head, and you are completely missing them because you are stubbornly committed to fishing the bottom. It is a frustrating reality, but it happens every single day on lakes all across the country. You really need to understand how fish behave when this dead zone sets up. They treat the thermocline like an invisible floor. To a fish, diving below that line is like a human trying to walk into a room filled with toxic smoke. They simply will not do it unless they absolutely have to, and even then, it is only for a few desperate seconds. They will swim along that invisible boundary like it is a solid concrete floor. All the bait fish, the shad, the minnows, they all know the rules too. They gather right above the dead zone, and where the bait goes, the big predators follow. You end up with a massive concentration of life squeezed into a very narrow band of water. If you drop your bait through that band and let it sink to the bottom, you are literally fishing under the fish. You are presenting your lure to mud and ghosts. Understanding this behavior completely changes the way you should approach a deep lake in the summer. You are no longer looking for structure on the bottom. You are looking for life suspended in the middle. So, how do you actually find this invisible barrier? If you have a modern sonar or fish finder, it is actually incredibly easy. You just need to know what to look for. Turn up the sensitivity on your screen. When the water gets hot and the lake divides, the cold water down deep becomes much denser than the warm water up top. This sudden change in water density is so extreme that the sonar beam actually bounces off it. You will see a faint, straight line of clutter or static running horizontally across your screen. It looks like a thin band of interference hovering right in the middle of the water column. That horizontal line of fuzz is your thermocline. If you see that line at 20 feet, you instantly know that everything below 20 feet is dead water. You can completely ignore the bottom. You do not need to cast deep. You do not need heavy weights. Your entire goal for the rest of the day is to keep your bait at 19 feet or higher. It is like having a cheat code for the lake. But what if you do not have $1,000 piece of electronics on your boat? What if you are fishing from a kayak or an old aluminum rowboat? Do not worry. You can still find the dead zone using the poor man's thermometer trick. It takes a little patience, but it works perfectly. Take a bare heavy sinker, maybe an ounce or two, and tie it to your line. Drop it over the side of the boat and let it sink down to about 10 feet. Leave it there for a full minute to let the metal adjust to the water temperature. Then, reel it up as fast as you can and immediately grab the sinker with your bare hand. Feel how warm it is. Now, drop it down to 15 feet. Wait a minute, reel it up fast, and feel it. Keep dropping it 5 feet deeper each time. Eventually, you will reel up that piece of lead, and it will feel like an ice cube. It will be noticeably, shockingly cold in your hand. Congratulations, you just found the thermocline. Whatever depth you are just at is the absolute deepest you should be fishing. Let us dive a little deeper into the biology of that bottom layer, just so you really understand why it is so bad. It is not just a lack of oxygen down there, it is actually poisonous. When all that organic matter rots on the bottom, it produces dangerous gases. We are talking about hydrogen sulfide and methane. If you have ever pulled up an anchor from deep water in late August and noticed that it smells like rotten eggs, that is hydrogen sulfide. That toxic gas gets trapped in the cold bottom layer because the thermocline acts like a lid on a pressure cooker. It keeps all the bad stuff sealed down deep. So not only is a fish struggling to breathe down there, but it is actually being poisoned by the water itself. Knowing this, you have to ask yourself why you would ever want to cast your favorite lure into a toxic soup. It makes absolutely no sense. Yet the habit of bottom fishing is so strong that people will stubbornly drag worms through rotten egg mud all day long, hoping for a miracle. Think about the sheer amount of money we spend on fishing gear. We buy expensive fluorocarbon line, highly detailed crankbaits, and premium-scented soft plastics. We spend hours meticulously organizing our tackle boxes. We watch tutorials on how to tie the perfect knot. We do all of this preparation, and then we go out and casually throw all of that expensive, carefully chosen gear right into the graveyard. When you are fishing below the thermocline, your bait choice does not matter. The color of your lure does not matter. Your retrieval speed does not matter. You could be throwing a solid gold jig tipped with $100 bill, and you still would not get a bite, because there is nothing alive down there to see it. The most important factor in fishing is not what you are throwing, but where you are throwing it. Location is everything. And in the heat of summer, vertical location, meaning your depth, is far more important than horizontal location. You have to put the bait where the breathing fish actually live. Timing is also incredibly important when we talk about this phenomenon. The thermocline does not exist all year round. In the spring, the water is cool and mixed. You can catch fish right on the bottom in 40 feet of water without a problem. But as we move into late June, July and August, the sun acts like a giant heater, warming up that surface layer and locking the cold water down deep. The hotter the summer, the stronger and more defined the barrier becomes. By August, that dead zone is fully established. It is thick, it is toxic, and it is totally avoided by every game fish in the lake. If you are fishing a deep reservoir in late August, and you are still using your spring bottom bouncing tactics, you are guaranteed to fail. You have to adapt to the seasons. You have to recognize that the lake is a living, changing environment. What worked 3 months ago is completely useless right now. Adapting to the summer water layers is the true mark of a fisherman who actually understands the water. It is also crucial to understand that this invisible barrier is not always a perfectly flat, straight line across the entire lake. Wind and current can actually tilt and shift the thermocline. Imagine a heavy wind blowing consistently from the west for 3 days straight. That wind pushes tons of warm surface water over to the eastern shore. Because all that warm water piles up on the east side, it physically pushes the thermocline much deeper on that side of the lake. Meanwhile, on the western shore, the cold water from below gets pulled upward to replace the surface water that blew away. So on the west side, the dead zone might be only 10 feet down, while on the east side, it might be pushed down to 30 feet. You have to pay attention to the wind history. You cannot just measure the depth in one cove and assume it is the exact same everywhere else. The water is dynamic. You have to stay alert, keep checking your electronics or doing the sinker test, and adjust your depth constantly as you move around the lake. So how do we actually adjust our tactics to beat the summer dead zone? First, let us talk about trolling and using crankbaits. Most guys look at the box their lure came in and it says it dives to 25 feet. They think, great, I will crank this along the bottom and smash the big ones. But if the oxygen cuts off at 15 feet, that 25-foot diver is useless. It is running 10 feet beneath the fish. You need to completely change your tackle. Put away the super deep divers. You need to select lures that run at exactly 14 or 15 feet. You want your bait ticking right along the roof of that dead zone. You want it swimming just above the invisible floor, where all the hungry predators are cruising. By keeping your bait in the oxygen-rich water, right in the faces of the suspended fish, your strike rate will absolutely explode. You are no longer dragging the mud. You are hunting in the danger zone, where the big fish actually hunt for their meals. If you are not a fan of trolling, one of the absolute best tactics for fishing above the dead zone is using a slip bobber. A slip bobber is the ultimate weapon for precision depth control. Let us say you find a great piece of structure, like a submerged tree, in 30 feet of water. But you know the oxygen stops at 20 feet. If you cast a jig, it will fall straight to the bottom and get lost in the toxic mud. But with a slip bobber, you can set your bobber stop at exactly 18 feet. You cast it out, the bait slides down, and it stops perfectly above the dead zone. Now you have a lively leech or a fresh minnow dangling right in the safe water, just above the submerged tree, exactly where the fish are hovering. They can look up, see your bait silhouetted against the surface light, and rush up to crush it. It is a deadly, highly effective way to fish during the dog days of summer, and it completely eliminates the risk of dropping your bait into the unbreathable depths. Let us talk about jigging, because this is where the most heartbreaking mistakes happen. You are out on the water, you spot a huge arch on your fish finder at 15 feet over a 40-foot bottom. You get excited, you drop your jig down. But here is the problem. You are so used to feeling the bottom that you let the jig fall right past the fish. It falls past 15 feet, past 20 feet, and lands in the mud at 40 feet. You close the bail and start hopping the jig. You are waiting for a bite that is never going to come, while the fish you just saw on the screen is 25 feet above your lure, completely unaware that you are even fishing. When you are dealing with a summer-layered lake, you have to learn how to count your bait down, or watch it fall on your sonar screen. You must engage your reel before the bait hits the dead zone. Stop it exactly where the fish are. Hover it right in their faces. Vertical jigging in the summer means fishing the middle of the water, not the bottom. Eventually, the brutal heat of summer ends and the dead zone goes away. This brings us to a massive seasonal event known as the fall turnover. As the air temperatures drop in late September and October, the surface water starts to get cold, very cold. And as water gets colder, it gets heavier. Eventually, that top layer of water becomes so heavy that it literally sinks, crashing right through the thermocline. When this happens, the entire lake violently mixes together. The toxic, suffocating water from the bottom gets churned up to the top, and the fresh, oxygen-rich water gets pushed down to the deep. For a week or two, fishing can be absolutely terrible because the fish are completely confused and the water smells awful. But once the turnover is complete, the invisible barrier is gone. The dead zone is erased. Suddenly, there is oxygen all the way down to the deepest mud flats. The fish can swim anywhere they want again. Understanding this cycle is the key to transitioning your tactics from summer suspension fishing back to deep water bottom bouncing in the late fall. Now, it is very important to mention that not all lakes are created equal. The rules of the dead zone apply differently depending on where you are fishing. If you are fishing a shallow farm pond that is only 8 feet deep, you do not have to worry about a thermocline. The wind is strong enough to mix the water all the way to the bottom all summer long. There is oxygen everywhere. But if you are on a massive, deep water reservoir or a natural glacial lake that drops down to 60 or 80 feet, the dead zone is a massive factor. Also, rivers and reservoirs with heavy current rarely set up a hard temperature barrier because the moving water keeps everything blended. You need deep, relatively still water for the layers to form. So before you launch your boat, think about the specific body of water you are facing. Ask yourself how deep it is and how much current there is. Knowing the personality of your lake is just as important as knowing how to tie a good fishing knot. The hardest part about adapting to this truth is the psychological barrier. As fishermen, we are incredibly stubborn creatures. We find a technique that works, and we stick with it forever. If bouncing a worm on the bottom caught us a huge bass in May, we firmly believe it will catch us a huge bass in August. It is really difficult to stare at a depth finder that says 50 feet and force yourself to only fish 20 feet down. Your brain screams at you that you are doing it wrong. You feel like you are fishing in the middle of nowhere, just dangling a bait in open space. It feels unnatural. But you have to trust the science. You have to trust the biology of the lake. Once you break that mental barrier and start catching massive fish suspended in the middle of the water column, your entire perspective will change. You will never look at deep water the same way again. You will stop fishing memories and start fishing the actual conditions in front of you. Let me leave you with one final, real-life scenario to drive this point home. You are sitting there, frustrated, baking in the sun. You have been dragging the bottom in 30 feet of water for 4 hours without a single nibble. You remember this video. You reel in your line, you slide your bobber stop down just 5 feet, or you pick up a crankbait that dives a little shallower. You cast out, and instead of hitting the toxic mud, your bait stops at 20 feet. It is hovering right on the edge of the oxygen line. You wait 30 seconds. Suddenly, the bobber shoots under, or the rod is nearly ripped out of your hands. The fight is on. You battle the fish to the net, and it is the biggest catch of your entire summer. A simple 5-foot vertical adjustment changed everything. You went from the graveyard to the feeding trough in one simple move. That is the power of understanding the water layers. That is how you turn a miserable, sweaty day of bad luck into an unforgettable story. Let us bring it all together. The most important takeaway here is that deeper does not always mean better. In the heat of summer, that deep, dark water you have been targeting is completely empty. It is a biological dead zone devoid of oxygen, filled with toxic gases, and abandoned by every single fish in the lake. The big revelation, the real turning point for your fishing game, is realizing that fish treat the thermocline like an invisible floor. They will suspend right above it, packing into a tight zone where the water is cool, but they can still breathe. By simply stopping your bait from hitting the bottom and keeping it in that oxygen-rich middle layer, you are completely changing the odds. You are no longer wasting time casting to ghosts. This one small adjustment in depth can completely revolutionize how you fish deep lakes in August. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If this video opened your eyes and helped you understand the water a little better, please hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been completely skunked fishing deep water, only to catch a monster right near the surface? Jump into the comments and tell us your story. Let's get the discussion going.